Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS Secretary. At my recent Finance Committee hearing, Senator Cantwell showed us this chart to illustrate the decline in infectious disease during the 20th century. The vaccine industry has long used this kind of chart as proof of the common claim that vaccines had saved hundreds of millions of American lives. The momentous 70% decline in mortalities in the United States and Western Europe from contagious diseases since 1900 marks one of the most monumental public health advances in all of human history. Was this really an achievement of mass vaccination programs, as many people, including Senator Cantwell, claim? The most comprehensive evidence-based study that rigorously examines this issue is a CDC-funded study that was published in 2000, performed by a team of researchers from CDC and Johns Hopkins University, and led by Dr. Bernard Geyer. The scientists meticulously examined 100 years of government infectious disease mortality data, and they concluded that nearly all the mortality reductions occurred before the introduction of vaccines, and that vaccinations could therefore claim little of the credit. For example, you can see from this graph that in 1900, some 13,000 Americans a year were dying of measles. By 1960, however, this number had dropped to a few hundred. But the measles vaccine was not introduced until 3 years later. Therefore, almost all the measles mortality had disappeared before the vaccine. So the measles vaccine can't really claim the credit for saving all those lives. Let's look at pertussis, also known as whooping cough. Again, we see the biggest drop in pertussis deaths occurred before the introduction of the pertussis vaccine. The same is true for influenza. Massive flu mortalities had already disappeared by the 1960s, but the vaccine was not widely disseminated until the 1980s. So once again, the vaccine cannot claim the credit. And look how tuberculosis deaths nearly disappeared along the exact same timeline as all those other infectious diseases. Even though there was no mass vaccination for TB in the United States, the mortalities disappeared without any help from a vaccine. Likewise, there was never a scurvy vaccine, but scurvy deaths also disappeared along the exact same timeline. The same is true for scarlet fever, which I had as a boy. Deaths from scarlet fever disappeared in lockstep alongside the drops in deaths from all those other contagions. So what actually did cause the decline in infectious disease mortality? A landmark 1977 study by McKinley and McKinley was required reading in most American medical schools during the 1970s and early 1980s. That study attributed the decline not to medical advances or innovations, but almost exclusively to agricultural and engineering innovations that improved nutrition. These included better roads, air transport, and refrigeration, and superior sanitation. This was the same period that flush toilets and water chlorination became widespread. The McKinleys credited less than 3.5% of the mortality declines to all medical measures put together, including antibiotics, surgeries, and vaccines. And here, for example, you see the introduction of chlorination correlates pretty perfectly with the decline in infectious disease mortality.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Was that disinformation? It's the heart of all of these conversations. Was that Robert Kennedy Jr.'s opinion? Well, it's an opinion based on all of the different graphs that you could see were put out over the years by HHS, by real CDC numbers. And that is what we have done here on the High Wire for years. It is also at the heart of when I made the documentary Vaxxed. From the moment I stepped into this conversation, everybody said you're going to be attacked, you're going to be ridiculed. My friends in Hollywood, where I was an Emmy Award-winning producer, said, Del, why would you do this? I don't care how good the movie is, you're going to destroy your film and television career. Why do that? And then those that I started working with as Vaxxed was touring the country said, I love this film, Del, but, you know, you're going to have to slow down a little bit. You know, these things move very slowly. slowly, there may be no change whatsoever. We've been at it for decades. Or in fact, I want to, give a shout out to one of my really good friends, Mark Blaxell, who is one of the most eloquent writers and speakers on the subject. I've learned so much from him. And Mark would say to me, Del, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I remember saying to him, Mark, we don't have time to be in a marathon any longer. I have a sense that we're at the end of this marathon, and therefore I'm taking the last leg and I'm going to sprint with everything I have. Now, I get that we were able to do what we've done with the high wire. We've been able to do what we did with the documentary Vax because we stood on the shoulders of giants. Really, frankly, mostly parents who, were dealing with their vaccine-injured children at home. And instead of just whining about it or complaining about it or, thinking how unfair the universe is, they spent whatever little time they had left to come out and shout to the rest of us, look out, this vaccine program is not as safe as they're telling you. You do not want to have to live this life the way that I'm living. So I get where the fear, I get where the pessimism, and Mark is one of those brilliant parents that has done everything he could to make a difference. And so it is with just complete, honor and joy that I get to say that he is now the head of autism. He helped build the anti-vax. This is the article written against him. He helped build the anti-vaccine movement. RFK just hired him. Neither a physician nor a scientist. New CDC senior advisor Mark Blaxell claims without evidence that every child who takes vaccine is in some ways injured. He's going to be running the autism program at CDC. There is no one better. There is not a better. First of all, he's been running businesses his whole life. So talented, but no one understands the subject better. You should check out his books, Age of Autism, Denial. Fantastic writer. Mark, we did it. And the other day when I called him to congratulate him, he said, I'm having a really good time. It's been, nearly a decade. I was waiting to hear those words come from his mouth. So from Mark Blaxell's mouth to all of you, go ahead and celebrate the moment that we're in. Sure, the attacks are still coming, but look at how many things are happening. Look how things are moving, and recognize that those of us that have been a part of this and those that came before us, we're here because we never gave up. Do not give up. Do not stand down. The truth is too important. The future of our species and the future of our children and their children and the future grandchildren of the world are counting on us right now. That is why I do what I do. That is why I thank every one of you that supports us and makes this possible. This is why we were born. I'm going to continue to work and see it that way, and I'll see you next week on the High Wire.